Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Cory Lee. After being diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at the age of 2, Cory Lee's thirst for adventure never ceased. He has traveled all 7 continents in his powered wheelchair while managing to run his travel blog, curbfreewithcorylee.com, where he shares his accessible and sometimes not so accessible travel adventures with others. Cory also does annual group trips where his followers can join him in international destinations. And in 2022, he launched the Curb Free Foundation, which is his nonprofit that provides wheelchair users with travel grants to go on their dream trip. As always, Cory's goal is to inspire other wheelchair users to roll out of their comfort zones and see all of the beauty our world has to offer. All right. Hi, Cory. Thanks so much for being on our podcast. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Emily. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here.
So, why don't you start by just telling our listeners about yourself, kind of who you are and what you're involved in?
Yeah, so I am Cory Lee, and I run a travel blog called Curb Free with Cory Lee, which I started a little over 10 years ago. Back in 2013, I launched the blog. And on the blog, I try to share my perspective as a wheelchair user that travels the world and hopefully showing other wheelchair users and people with disabilities what they can do in various destinations. So over the past 10 years, I've been to all 7 continents, over 40 countries, and I have all of that information on the blog and on my social media as well. Social media has definitely taken over my life a little bit in the past few years, but in a good way, I think. So it's always good to just reach new people and show them that the world is accessible for them.
That's excellent. So you mentioned you're a wheelchair user. Can you share with our listeners how that happened or your particular circumstances and kind of what your day-to-day looks like as a result?
Yeah, so when I was really little, about 2 years old, my mom started noticing that I would take a few steps and then I would fall down and just like face plant the ground. And so she started getting really concerned when I was 2 and took me to a doctor, and they did a muscle biopsy and found out that I had spinal muscular atrophy type 2. And so basically what that means is that my muscles are much weaker than, an able-bodied person. I'm not able to walk at all. And by the age of 4, I was using a wheelchair full time. And so I've used the wheelchair ever since. But I mean, I really haven't known any other way of life. So it's kind of just like life for me now. And I'm completely used to it and use a powered wheelchair every day. So it's really given me the ability to travel and to, live a pretty like amazing life. Like if I do say so, like I'm able to explore the world with my wheelchair. And luckily, I think accessibility is constantly getting better. So even if something isn't accessible today, and hopefully it will be in the near future.
I learned about you that you were born actually in 1990, which is the same year that the ADA was passed. So you really haven't lived a life without the ADA. You're kind of what we call like an ADA baby. So you've always had the ADA in your life. And so I kind of wondered from your experience, how did you first learn about the ADA? Kind of when was that? Where was that? How did you first encounter the ADA?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was born in 1990, and I mean, I've always considered myself really lucky that I was born in that year and haven't known a life outside of the ADA because, I mean, just like learning about Judy Human, I really learned about, I guess, like the ADA and what all went into, creating it when I was like a teenager, I guess, and about Judy Human and like Ed Roberts and all of the pioneers that really paved the way for us today with disabilities. And so just like hearing their stories, I mean, is incredible. And then when Crip Camp came out, the movie on Netflix, I mean, it gave me a whole other perspective, like of how amazing they were. So super thankful to them and the ADA and the various laws that have gone into place. I mean, when I was growing up and going through school, I did have issues with getting put into like mainstream classes and having a system my mom did every single year to keep me in those mainstream classes. But we constantly, advocated for, my rights. Me and my mom and I did. And luckily it all worked out. But I mean, living pre ADA, I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, when did you first kind of get the itch to travel, or when did you discover that that was a passion of yours?
Really always loved traveling. My first trip that I kind of vividly remember was at 4 years old, and I went to Walt Disney World with my family. My whole family went, and it was just like super memorable for me. I'm still a Disney addict and go at least 1 or 2 times every year to Walt Disney World. So did my college internship at Disney World. Like I'm a full blown Disney adult. No shame, but I think that is kind of where it started, but really where I think my travel bug, like where it really, really bit me was when I was 15. I went on a trip to the Bahamas, and that was kind of the first time that I got to experience a different culture and like try different foods and meet, people that weren't American, like go to another country. And it was such an incredible trip and experience. And I thought at that moment, if the Bahamas can be this incredible and this close to the US, then what would somewhere like India be like? Or what would Australia be like? Or Europe? Or all of these far flung places around the globe. And so that is where I really made up my mind after that Bahamas trip that I wanted to see more and go further.
Yeah, and how did you come to the decision to start blogging about your experiences traveling and making that, kind of putting yourself out there in that way?
It was really a convergence of two events that happened to me back in 2013. So in late 2013, I was getting ready to graduate college and trying to go to job interviews, but not really getting any calls at all from hiring managers until one day somebody called me from a marketing company. My degree is in marketing, by the way. They called me from a marketing company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and told me that they would fly me to Pittsburgh the next day and give me a shot at an interview. And so I flew to Pittsburgh the next day. And I'm sure you know how daunting air travel is as a wheelchair user. So already I was like nervous about it, having a hard time getting there. I finally got to Pittsburgh and rolled into the hiring manager's office right after I landed. And he immediately looked me up and down and said, "Well, this job involves traveling, so you're definitely not the best fit." And it was just like the way that he said it, like he immediately only saw the wheelchair and didn't see me as a person or as a potential employee at all. And so I was like completely dismayed, cried the whole way back home on the flight, and just like honestly didn't know, anything going to come from getting this degree. But around that same week, I was also researching for an upcoming trip to Australia. I was going to Australia for my college graduation trip and got online and pretty quickly noticed that there was very little accessible travel information about Australia or about other destinations around the world. At that time, there were only a few websites that were devoted to accessible travel. And so, between the hiring manager telling me no and turning me down and telling me I couldn't travel, and then that same week realizing a lack of information, the convergence of those two things is really what made me want to start Curb Free with Cory Lee and hopefully, show wheelchair users what is possible.
I love that story. I think it's remarkable that you kind of really showed that hiring manager by making travel your entire career and the work that you do.
I'll just like mail him a postcard from everywhere I go, but
Yeah, you showed him, that's for sure. I really like that. You mentioned kind of lack of information as one of the barriers that you experience traveling other places. I'd love to know more about what has your experience been with accessibility in other countries? Are there countries that stand out as, most accessible or not doing as well? Just kind of your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of people, especially in the US, are a little intimidated to travel internationally, especially when you add a wheelchair into the mix. So, knowing what's accessible, what isn't accessible in advance of going is a challenge. I mean, even for me today, I mean, I'm flying to Brazil next week. And I'm like a little nervous about it, but I've done a lot of research and I feel prepared, but I think, it is definitely intimidating even today for me to travel. But there are certainly some countries that are doing better than others. I think that Scandinavia, that region of Europe, is phenomenal. So, Finland, I've had amazing experiences in. They have over 300 wheelchair accessible taxis in Helsinki, Finland, which is, unheard of. Like, even in the US, you can't hardly find that many. So, Finland is amazing. Amsterdam, I had a really good time. Anywhere in Scandinavia. Also, Australia, I think, is one of the most accessible places in the world, especially Sydney. When I went to Sydney, Australia, it was really the first trip where I felt complete freedom and independence. Like I could do anything that I wanted to as a wheelchair user. So every mode of transportation was accessible. And it was just a really freeing feeling to have in Sydney. And then in terms of least accessible, I would probably say Paris, France. I unfortunately just had a really bad time there. And the metro at the time that I went back in 2011 was not accessible at all. It was really difficult to get around the city with a wheelchair, and the attitudes of the people when I was like needing help, it just wasn't great. So I would love to go to Paris again and try it out since it has been so long since I've been there. It's been like, what, 13 years since I've been now. So I would love to go back and try it again. But just at the time, it was not a good trip for me.
Wow, that's interesting. I would not have guessed Paris, France, but I guess
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense given how, how old the city is and maybe some of the ways that it was designed, inaccessibly. So, I know a lot of the other wheelchair users that I talk to when we talk about travel and flying, one of the big things that comes up is, wheelchairs getting damaged. Have you experienced that? And how do you deal with that? And is there something that you do to mitigate that? How would you deal with it if you got to somewhere like Sydney and your wheelchair was damaged? What would you do in that situation?
I experience it all the time, unfortunately. I would say on approximately 50% of the flights that I take, my wheelchair is damaged in some way. Usually it's a very minor damage where, we can quickly fix it before we even leave the airport. But it has been damaged a few times where it was so bad that I couldn't even drive myself out of the airport. I'm immediately like trying to figure out how can I get this fixed? Where is a wheelchair repair shop? And so on a recent flight that I did actually last summer, I flew from Egypt, from Cairo, Egypt, to Barcelona, Spain. And when I got in Barcelona, we discovered that the front wheel on my wheelchair was completely broken. And so immediately we had to find a wheelchair repair shop and go to it the next day and get them to repair the wheel, which cost, it was like maybe $150 to $200. But it was an extra expense and really a waste of about 6 hours, of our trip getting that repaired, which, was no good. But just, I think, doing research in advance about what repair shops are there in that destination, if there are any, just looking that information up before you even go on the trip and having those resources with you, either printed out or in your phone, would be really great, because then if something does go wrong, you're already, a step ahead and you know where you could maybe get it fixed if they have availability to fix it. And so that's something I would definitely recommend doing. Otherwise, I would really just encourage people, I know air travel is really rough. An average of, I think it's 31 wheelchairs per day are damaged from air travel in some way. But there are steps that you can take to mitigate those damages. I always take bubble wrap with me and bubble wrap the joystick or any important parts and like duct tape that bubble wrap on, and then taking off any parts of your wheelchair that you can and putting them into a carry-on bag. So I always take off my knee pads, the headrest, and put those in a carry-on bag, just so, there's less of a chance of them being damaged when they go into the cargo hold.
That's good advice. Do you have thoughts as to how airlines could improve the situation with wheelchair users and traveling with their wheelchairs, having it set up so that there's tie downs so that you can travel in your wheelchair? Or what are your thoughts on how airlines could improve that situation?
My ultimate dream is to be able to just roll on the plane and stay in my wheelchair Absolutely. There's an organization I really love that's doing incredible work called All Wheels Up. It's run by Michelle Irwin. Her son is disabled and uses a wheelchair. And so she started All Wheels Up. And it's, I think, the only nonprofit in the world that's devoted to getting a wheelchair spot on airplanes. So I love them and the work that they're doing. I do really think from their advocacy and their outreach that one day we will see, a wheelchair spot on planes and we'll be able to stay in our wheelchairs. But until then, and until the airlines are ready for that, I think that the biggest thing that I would love for airlines to do is really just to train their staff on how to handle wheelchairs and how to handle wheelchair users when you're, loading us into the plane, helping us transfer into the plane seat. I know so many people that have gotten dropped during that transfer process, and so many wheelchairs that have gotten damaged just from a lack of knowledge and understanding by the staff. So I would love to see more airlines do better training and actually hire wheelchair users to come in and do that training and show people, how important, wheelchairs are for us.
Yeah, also really good advice and insight into how that could be improved. So obviously, you know tons about travel and you're this travel blogger, you've been all over everywhere, and it sounds like you do these group trips at this point where you invite other wheelchair users to destinations. So can you tell us more about those trips?
Yeah, so every year since 2018, I have done a curb free group trip where it's totally wheelchair accessible. And we have gone to some pretty amazing places so far. We've done group trips in Morocco, Iceland, Costa Rica, Patagonia, Chile, Barcelona, Spain. And then this May, we're going to Greece. And so every year we do a different international destination. And it's really been, I mean, it's consistently my favorite trip every single year because it gives me an opportunity to travel with other wheelchair users. And we're constantly on those trips learning from each other, sharing travel experiences and travel tips with each other and forming really lifelong friendships. I mean, there are some amazing people that I've met on those trips that have definitely become lifelong friends. And so, if anyone is listening and wants to join us on a curb free group trip that's totally accessible, we would love to have you.
Do you find that the people that join you on those trips are other, experienced travelers like you, or people who are maybe a little bit less experienced?
Yeah, it's really a mix, I would say. I mean, I would say it's about 50-50, where some of them have definitely traveled a lot. Some have even traveled, to more places than I've traveled, but they're just wanting that experience with other wheelchair users and to meet new people and make new friends. And then there are some other people that, have never traveled internationally and they're going on their first ever international trip with us because they feel more confident traveling with a group and with other wheelchair users, be able to help out and understand if something does, we will find a solution and work our way through it together. So it's really a mixture.
That sounds awesome. I bet those are so fun.
Yeah, yeah. You need to join us one day.
Yeah, I would love to. I would absolutely love to. So, you also have a couple other things you're involved in. You've got a children's book, right? And you also have a nonprofit, the Curb Free Foundation. So,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit more about those as well?
Yeah, back in 2020, my mom and I co-wrote the children's book. It's called Let's Explore with Core, and it's all about a kid in a wheelchair that travels the world, and every destination that's featured in the book that Core goes to is a destination that I have actually been to. So it's hopefully showing, kids that use a wheelchair, that what places are accessible and showing them where they can travel to. But I also really, really hope that it's showing able bodied children, that people with disabilities that use a wheelchair can live really amazing lives and have these incredible experiences around the world. And so it's been a lot of fun since we put that book out. We've been able to do some readings at different schools, and it's always so fun just to see all the kids' reactions to the book. And then last year, we started the Curb Free Foundation, and it's a 501c3 nonprofit, and we provide travel scholarships and grants to wheelchair users so that they can go on their dream trip. So, I have been able over the past 10 years to have some remarkable experiences around the world. And so often when I'm sharing those experiences on social media and on the blog, I hear from other wheelchair users, well, that would be amazing to do, but I just don't have the money to do it. Or how do I get the money to do it? And so we want to eliminate that financial barrier for people that are dreaming of going on the ultimate trip, that they've dreamed of since they were a kid. And so far, we've been able to send wheelchair users to places like Disney World, on a Caribbean cruise. We sent a girl to Nashville recently to go to a concert and see a performer that she had always wanted to see. We're sending someone to Morocco in a few months. So if anyone is listening and you've always dreamed of going to a particular destination, please go to the curbfreefoundation.com and fill out the application, and hopefully we will be able to grant your dream trip.
That's wonderful. And I assume people want to donate. Can they donate at that website as well?
Curbfreefoundation.com. There's a link there on the top that says donate. And so, the more money that we can get for the foundation, the more trips that we'll be able to give out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what else would you like listeners to know about accessibility for people with disabilities?
I really think, it seems so daunting to travel the world as a wheelchair user, but I promise you that you can do it, and accessibility is constantly improving. I mean, there are places now that I literally could not have traveled to even 5 years ago that are finally accessible now. One of those is India. I was able to go to India a few years ago, and I had always dreamed of going to India, but they did not have any mode of accessible transportation until just a few years ago. And so I finally went, and it was like one of my favorite trips of all time. And also Morocco was another great one for me that would not have been accessible 10 years ago. And so, if there is somewhere that you've dreamed of going and you really want to go to, but it isn't accessible today, just keep checking, and who knows what 5 years from now looks like. I think that, if we all keep pushing for more accessibility and keep spreading awareness about accessibility, then we will see a different world years from now. Hopefully, not too long away, but it's constantly improving.
Yeah, and I think you've also mentioned that adults with disabilities spend something like $58 billion per year on travel, right? So it's kind of an untapped market, perhaps.
Yeah, adults with disabilities, according to a survey from the Open Doors organization, spend over 58 billion per year. And every time I talk to like a destination representative or a tour company and tell them that number, eyes like immediately widen, and they're just shocked that people with disabilities are spending, that much money in the travel industry. And so I think, when we are talking to destinations or trying to spread awareness about accessible travel, that is really important to include, because it really puts it in perspective that it's not only, a good thing to do from a moral standpoint to make a destination accessible, but it's also really good from a business standpoint to become accessible.
Definitely. So, after today's episode, if listeners want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, what are the best ways to connect and just learn more about your story and your adventures?
Yeah, you can definitely check out my blog at curbfreewithcorylee.com and contact me on there on the contact page. Or you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at curbfreecorylee, and feel free to DM me. I'm always happy to chat if you have any questions at all about traveling as a wheelchair user. So yeah, I would love to hear from anyone that's listening.
Great. And we'll put those links in our show notes so people can find them there. And is there anything else that you'd like to share with listeners, or anything that we didn't ask that we should have?
I really feel like we covered a lot. And I really enjoyed talking with you all about accessibility around the world. And yeah, I just hope that everyone listening hopefully gained a few good tips, but also just feels like really inspired now to get out there and see the world. There's really nothing better than traveling, I think. And it's so invigorating for me whenever I'm able to go to a new place and discover a new accessible destination. And it just makes me feel like the most alive, I think, that I ever feel. So the world is a pretty remarkable place, and I think it's a place for all of us, no matter what our abilities are.
Well, thank you so much, Cory. It's been excellent getting to know you, and thank you for sharing those tips with listeners, and good luck on your future travels.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucinia is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, grant number 90DPAD0014. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.